Dear friends, I welcome you all in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. This is NMBF Coffee Chats, where we discuss topics that are relevant to us Christians and also to the society. And today we are truly glad to have Mr. Cherian Thomas with us to speak on the subject of work in God's kingdom. A little bit of introduction about Mr. Cherian Thomas for those of us who may not know him. Mr. Cherian Thomas is regional leader for World Vision International for the South Asia Pacific region. He worked in the corporate sector in finance, banking, infrastructure development for 29 years before joining World Vision 7 years ago. He is married to Jamila Koshi for over 33 years, and they are parents to two grown-up daughters. They attend Marthoma Church, Primrose Road in Bangalore, and have been engaged in work among university students through UESI for over 4 decades. Active members of the Tracy community and have contributed to a few books on marriage, family, and contemporary issues. Books namely such as Should I Care and Talking Families by ISPCK, two such books. So we are truly glad and privileged to have Brother Cherian Thomas with us this evening to share his insights and wisdom on this subject. So over to Brother Cherian.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, Abhi, to be part of the coffee chats. So the video that I played was something that was circulating for a while around the theme of Teachers' Day. So just my question would be to those of you who are on the chat, what do you think of the video?
Any response, friends? What did you think about the video?
You can unmute and say it. What do you think of the video? You can type it in the chat box if you want.
Sure. Yeah. Anyone? How did you find the video? Yeah. Everyone contributes to the society. It's a comment by Mary. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. All jobs are important. Okay, we are getting nice feedback. Proud of us students. Teaching is very crucial. The worth of the person was still centered on what a person did.
Okay.
For the kids and a nation.
Yeah, so this video was circulating for the last few days in many of the WhatsApp groups. Okay. So I just thought that this is something that people would have seen. Depending on on where we all are in terms of the work that we do. I think there was a very interesting comment that sometimes what we do seems to give us more value than what we really are. And that certainly comes out. Of course, the video ends by saying that teachers are very important and that teachers deserve to have the term TR prefixed before their name. And that's one way sometimes you see the world tends to do. So it makes, you put DR, you put AR, you put LR. There are so many that you put CA. Many of us, many people, the whole, particularly in the professional world, there seems to be a lot of worth that people seem to have on the nature of the work they do. But that's a different issue altogether. But the question that we need to ask is: are some types of work therefore more important, more relevant, more fulfilling, more contributory than others? So the point that Cynthia is making, for instance, is that the focus was on implying the teacher was the most important part of society, and I basically agree. So if you were to have a pyramid or a hierarchy of work done, teachers would be right on top there. Is that what we think is appropriate? Is that correct? Is that how we can look at the issue biblically? Is the question that we need to keep asking ourselves when we look at work. Okay. So often there are certain jobs, certain kinds of work that people do. You may be a pastor, you may be a religious leader, You could be a teacher, you could be a doctor, a judge, a soldier, a farmer, a highways engineer, or a politician, or there's so many things that you could be. And there is a tendency to classify this work into what is most important, what is less important. And sometimes we have these issues and debates, and this video that we have is one such discussion that is floating around. Okay, in the church also we have our own understanding sometimes of work and our own distinctions that we make. There are some work that we call full-time work, spiritual work, God's work, ministry, and we tend to classify work as some work being sacred and some work being non-sacred. So we call it secular. So there is this whole sacred versus secular conversations and distinctions that tend to get made in work. Okay, and I think it's really important for us as Christians to be able to look at work biblically, just as how God looked at it. For that good way, and as Brother Jacob Samuel prayed, is to go back to the beginnings and to go back to what God did. Okay, and if you see Genesis 1, and I know all of you who are here on this call are very familiar with Genesis chapter 1. So I've put it up on the screen. We are not going to read it. But we see this account of creation, in one sense, describing how the world came to be. Okay, so it is an account of how the world came to be, how humankind came to be, how the universe, the larger universe around the planet Earth came to be. So all this is part of this conversation, part of this description of how the world came to be. And these are some of these are the verses from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, right up to Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. Okay, so if one were to look at some of the key aspects which these two chapters cover, this chapter covers, all these verses cover, we find that Genesis 1 is a very, very earth-centric account, which is written in a manner that even the smallest child would be able to understand. Okay, it is obviously not, I mean, we do believe that this was the book of Genesis. The beginnings was written by Moses, along with the other 4 books which formed the Torah. So this was what was written by Moses. Now, Moses, of course, came several centuries, several millennia after creation had occurred. And yet, he is, in one sense, writing it as if he is describing what he saw. But it is certainly not an eyewitness account. It could well have been the fact that the nation of Israel, which was brought out as a nation of slaves from Egypt to a new place altogether, a new land altogether, may have had questions. And Moses, as the leader of this nation, had to deal with these questions that people asked. And of course, the question of origins is something that happens to all of us. These are questions that all of us ask as we grow up. And even if you look back, our own teenage years, as we come to form an identity for ourselves, we ask this question: who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going from here? What is the purpose for my existence? And these are questions, or then the questions of origins are very closely linked to it. It is important to remember that Genesis 1 is very, very dramatic. The language is very dramatic. It's drama, it's poetic. And it is very, very amenable to drama, music, choreography. And that is why there used to be a play called The Lighthouse, which many of our EU students would perform. And they would very, very dramatically, very, very pictorially present the whole account of creation. There are these verses which talk of the forming of the earth and then the filling of the earth. So it's written in that very dramatic form. It's not meant to be a scientific treatise or a historical account, but what is established through this whole thing is that God created the universe. The reason why we all exist, the reason why the world exists, is that God created, and that is and why He created all this. And it also talks about the creation of man. And so there is this whole doctrine of creation which we don't actually talk about too much. For many of us, doctrine starts with sin, and we don't talk as much about creation as much as we ought to. But it's important for us to just keep this in mind. What we see as we look at these verses is that at the center of all this, you find God being the author of creation. God is ordering creation. God is the one who is involved in creation. He conceived, he designed, he commanded, he fashioned, he supervised, he monitored, and then later on, he entrusted, he empowered, he delegated. Okay, all around work. I usually, when I use this chapter, and particularly when we are able to meet face to face, I asked, usually these are groups of young students, if you were to put a title to some of these verses, or to some of or to this passage, what would be the title that you give? Apart from the fact that this is a story of origins, it is also as if it is saying God at work. We often when roads are being, when there are any public works in our cities or on highways, you'll find that there is usually a diversion, and there is a board that is put up, men at work. So this is as if to say, hey, just wait. Here this account, we're asking the question of origins. God was at work. And we find that in this whole account, there is so much of matter that is getting created, that is being formed and shaped to form the universe. And I talked about it being earth-centric. And it is almost as if the earth is really the center of human existence. Because if you look at matter as we understand it, the earth is a small planet. It's not even the biggest planet. It's one of the smaller planets in our solar system, which is part of the galaxy Milky Way, which is itself one of the smaller galaxies, tucked up in the corner of the universe. And there are much larger galaxies around. So in terms of total matter, the Earth represents such a minuscular, such a small, tiny fraction of what is total matter. The bulk of the matter and energy, which are mutually interconvertible, are really the stars or the heavenly bodies as we see them. And there are just 5 words or a small sentence to describe the creation of the bulk of matter in our universe. He also made the stars. It is almost as if Moses, as an afterthought, is adding that about the stars. And the rest of it is all about the creation of the earth. And again, it is very important to realize that in these verses, and I put them down in red, the number of times as creation is happening, as the whole creative process is occurring, the word good is being used. Work is good. God invented it. And if we look at the kind and nature of the work that God is doing, it is eminently physical. It is essentially using, what we would call in physics, forces, using power, using energy to create something out of something that was unseen, as energy, perhaps energy got converted into matter. And for all that, God is saying that it is good. And so when we have these questions of which work is better, which kind of work is better, I think we need to look at how the Lord looked at work. God is spending time in doing something which is, something that we would never see as spiritual. Because if we think of spiritual activity and what is spiritual and what is sacred as our time of prayer, time of Bible study, or even times of fellowship where we exhort and edify each other through conversation, it's not that. God is doing physical work. He's like a potter fashioning clay, using clay to make a pot, using the mud to make a man, and to form the first human beings. I mean, that is how it is described. God is doing things that are seemingly essentially physical, not necessarily a great mental exercise either. But of course, there is so much of thought that must have gone into the whole thing. That's why I said God conceived, designed, commanded, fashioned. We may sometimes argue about the process of how it was creation, and we mistakenly try and pit evolution versus creation and sometimes have those meaningless arguments. The Bible clearly establishes the fact that God created, and as students of science, as people of science, try and discover it, they understand the secrets of the universe better by closer study and reflection to hopefully tell us with time how this creative process came up and how it became so. But the fact is, God looked at this whole process of creation, the things that he created, the concepts that he brought in, the forming that was done, the filling that was done, the entire universe, the whole environment as we understand it, the waters, the seas, the land, the trees, the animals, the birds, human beings. He sees all this as good. Of course, at the end of the sixth day, when the human beings were formed, as the account describes, the term that is used in English is, it was very good. So 6 times it was good, and then the 7th time it was very good. Okay. So very clearly we find that there is an approval for work and for things that are done even very physically, very clearly evident there. And that's why, when Paul uses the metaphor of the body, and he uses that in different places when he writes to the churches, particularly they had this whole issue on who is more important in the church. Is it the teacher? Is it the prophet? Is it the pastor? Is it the administrator? Who is more important? And he says that, look, we are a body. We are many parts. Each body has its function. Each body has its role. You will recognize the importance of a part only when it is absent or when it ceases to function. And then you realize how critical and how important it is. Some parts are visible, some parts are not so visible. And yet all of them are required for the function or the functioning, the effective functioning of the body. And so that is really what work is like. Work is really about not trying to figure out what is more important and what is less important. It is about trying to figure out what is my role, what is my place in the whole theater of the universe, the world that God has given us, and to figure out what it is that God would have me do through the work that I do. Work is important because God invented it, because God instituted it. It is built in as a creation principle. It is built in, it is right into creation itself. And it is good. There is nothing that is ungodly or ungood about any kinds of work. All work is important. Cleaning the sewers is important. Doing manual labor is important. Running a power plant is important. Even writing code, if it might seem meaningless, but it makes sometimes the lives of so many others so much easier because the code is more efficient. There was, again, one more of those WhatsApp forwards today saying that Bangalore is probably the only tech center in the world where people travel for 2 hours, software engineers travel for 2 hours at work and spend 8 hours trying to design things which will enable us to access goods and services in a matter of 10 minutes. Okay, so in one sense, every work that we do, unless of course it is work that is immoral because of its very nature or character, all work is good. And that is why the idea of human beings made in the image of God is important. Because work gives all human beings, and particularly for us as the church, as people who are redeemed human beings, an opportunity to both reflect him and represent him. So an image of ours is what we see in the mirror. And we are made in God's image. When we say we are made in God's image, we are in one sense, like God, we share certain things with God. Of course, we do not share the attributes of God which make him transcendent, but we certainly share the attributes of God which make him close to us, which are his moral attributes. So we are not omnipotent or omniscient or omnipresent like God is. We, however, can be holy like God is. We can be good like God is. We can be kind like God is. We can be just and faithful and loyal in terms of the people that we are. We can be patient. We can exhibit the nature of God in terms of his character, and that is in one sense limitless. There is no limit to how we can exhibit it. So while we are otherwise in a physical sense very, very limited, while contrasted to God who is unlimited and infinite, we are in a very finite way, and we are all finite. Our weight is can be measured in kilograms, our volume in cubic centimeters. The time that we live on earth can be measured in seconds or in hours or in days or years. But ultimately there is this whole ability that we have to reflect God's character, to reflect him and represent him, because that is what rulers of that time did. They would appoint their satraps in the lands that they conquered. And those were the people who would represent the king or the ruler, the actual ruler of. And God, in one sense, has placed human beings, and he gives human beings that very, very special position at the very pinnacle of creation to reflect him. And therefore, for instance, the whole mandate that is given to human beings, and more specifically now to the church, which recognize this, and therefore the church as part of God's kingdom, realize that this work that we do, or all the work that we do, is really an opportunity to reflect God. It is to care for his creation. So creation care is very much an essential part of what we do. Caring for the environment and being good stewards of the environment is therefore something that we do. But equally working in all our jobs, in various work that we do, whether, like I said, whether we are pastors or whether we are teachers or soldiers or farmers, figuring out what the needs of human society are and enabling us to work as his image bearers, people who reflect his character, people who are persons as God is a person, but always finite in a finite way, but representing the infinite in his moral attributes, is an opportunity for us that we do. And so that is something that comes through very, very clearly in this passage as we see it. Now, for some of us, when we look at the way people look at attitude to work, work is an occupation. I just have to work because I can't help it. I need to earn money. I have to take care of myself. So work is thus far no further. Okay? And sometimes many Christians have a feeling that ultimately I work so that I can go and distribute tracts in the evening. I can go for Bible studies. I can meet college students in the evening. My work itself I do because I have to earn the money to allow me to do these other things. So the work I do is, it is something that I can't help. I need to do it. It's a necessary evil sometimes, or a necessary not so good, so that I can do what is better or what is good in the hours outside of my occupation, so that it will fund and it will give me the ability to do those things. Sometimes for some of us, work can be a profession, and those of us who have technical skills and abilities take pride in the fact that we reach a certain degree of skills and proficiency in the work that we do. And therefore, professional advancement is something that people are very clear and concerned about. So they're very committed to their work, but clearly in seeing work as an ability to reflect technical skills. For some, work is a career, and particularly in the more modern organizations, a career is one where you move into certain positions where you have higher responsibilities, and often that is closely correlated with number of people who report to you, who you are responsible for. And so we have words like leadership and career and all getting very, very closely intertwined together. So it's really about positions, achieving certain positions and attaining certain levels of responsibility. All work can be a vocation where we are called by God to make contributions to his world. And I think that is what really comes across in the conversation that God has with human beings. In verse 27, it says, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. He blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air. And he says, I give you everything on this world for you. I want you to take care of all these things. And this is for you. And this is for you to look after. So it's as if God takes so much trouble over making this earth. And then what he does with it is that he just gives it to us. And he tells us now it is yours to take care of. It is yours to look after. It is just like, almost like you make a brilliant toy. And the earth is such a masterpiece if you see it. From the number of people it was able to take care of at the beginning, until not very long ago, till the beginnings of the 20th century, the number of people on the earth was just probably how much? A little over a billion or closer to 2 billion by the early part of the 20th century. Today, it's close to 8 billion. It threatens to move up to 10 billion. And surprisingly, we've been finding resources, finding ways in which human beings can continue to fill the earth. and continue to find in the earth the resources for us to exist sustainably. There are dangers, there are problems with the way we sometimes manage it. A lot of the things that we do lead us to think that sometimes this cannot go on forever, particularly the way we are seeing climate and the way climate change is affecting our universe, temperatures rising, glaciers melting. We read about all this. But clearly, it is like, making a brilliant toy and then giving it to a child and telling the child, now you handle it. You play with it. You do with it what you want. You can even improve on it further if you want. That's really what the Lord has done when he gave and entrusted the earth to us as humankind. And I think that's an awesome responsibility. So the mandate that God gave us at creation to be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over, is actually a very, very important spiritual task. No less spiritual than what we otherwise would bracket within quotes as spiritual. And he says, fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth. These are very, very active, strong verbs. And he says, subdue it. And usually when I talk about subduing, we can always look at sports and ask ourselves, in which sport do you find one sports person trying to subdue the other? And usually the answer is wrestling or judo, where you find two people very, very proximate to each other. And in one sense, to be able to subdue, you have to be in close contact, in close engagement. And that is what God expects us in the way we engage with the world. To be so closely engaged with the world that we understand it better and better. We understand the mysteries that it holds. We understand its secrets. And that has been the voyage of discovery that human beings have had. The whole process of whether it is scientific invention and discovery, whether it is art and culture, whether it is trade and commerce and banking, these are all ways in which we are making the world work for us. We are subduing it, we are ruling over it. But the calling for us is to do this work as image bearers of God, always reflecting God and representing God. Yes, we know that post-sin, post-human fall, we have seen that not everyone necessarily is able to do it. And then we find so much of pain. The whole process of work itself, because of the curse, is by the sweat of your brow that you will earn your bread. But in redemption, we are finding that work itself is redeemed. And that is where, for us as a church, for us in God's kingdom, work is an opportunity to continue to be faithful to God's original mandate at creation, to discover our vocations and to be able to faithfully serve the way God intended it to be. Carefully, as good stewards, ruling over it, reflecting Him. So that's clearly the message that Genesis 1 and 2 had. So you see in the passage, you find no dichotomy between the sacred and the spiritual. All work is good work. God did intensely physical work. There were so many zillions of newtons of or kilonewtons or meganewtons of power, or so many which were being exercised and expended in the creation of the universe. So work clearly is important, but work is not everything, and that is something that we all realize it, because God rested at the end of His work. It says in the end of that chapter, in the beginning of the next chapter, at the end of this passage that we read, that God rested from the work that He had been doing. He didn't rest because He was tired, but we need to rest because otherwise we would find that we would get tired. And He, in it, through it, gave us a pattern, telling us that, look, you have 6 days, you work profitably, work meaningfully, contribute to my world, improve on my world, reflect my character as you live in this world and you work here, and then take one day off as a day of rest, where you think about me, where you reflect, where you give, in one sense, a rest to everything, to yourself, to the animals, to the machinery that you employ, so that you will be able to recoup your energy and get back. So work is not everything. God rested. So broadly, these are the very basic principles about work that we see clearly enshrined in these verses in Genesis 1 and the early part of Genesis 2. So Yeah, so I think I've taken a fair bit of time in going through this passage. So are there any comments, questions, any reflections? I think this is a time when we can have a time of discussion.
I think just what we'll do is probably we'll stop